I don't know if y'all can see him, but the calf with the white paint on his back, he's standing right there, and that's the end, or it's either. Oh wait, no, there he is, right over there. You can see that white paint on his back right there. But that's the animal that was having the death diarrhea, and I took a hard look at him today, and he is looking like he is responding well to the antibiotics. The rest of the animals are outside right now chewing on grass. And I don't know if y'all can hear it, but it's raining, and the calves out there, they're eating their food. It's been raining all day. It's supposed to rain for a couple more hours. And so I just got everything, I just got everything squared away for the day. And so, here's the thing. Okay. So, whatever, right? I talk about this all the time. One of the things, okay, because here's the thing, because when you look at my situation, right, I talk about this, and I'm just being honest about it. I'm not bragging about it. I'm just telling you the truth. When you take a look at my situation, you're effectively talking about it's like a 0.000000001%. All right. I legitimately don't know anybody that even does 10%. I'm effectively on my own. Like, I don't know how else to put this. I legitimately, I effectively I work by myself effectively 15 hours a day. Legitimately, okay, and I'm not lying about it. I legitimately work 7 days a week, and I work 15 hours a day. All right? I've been working like this for over a decade. All right? I legitimately work, sometimes I even work over 15 hours a day. I don't know how else to put this, and I talk about this in reality. Okay, so when you take a look at what I do, you have to understand that, running 90 cattle in 5 months, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. When I do it, it looks easy because I legitimately worked on this thing my entire life. All right, it looks easy when I do it, but I guarantee it, and I talk about this all the time in a realistic sense. You have to put in the work, all right? Nobody cares, all right? If you don't do the work, then you don't get the results. And getting the results is not easy. Borderline impossible, legitimately, I legitimately do not know anybody that even does 10%. And here's a very realistic way to take a look at what I'm talking about. Over the next 3 months, I would be willing to bet, I would legitimately bet that my cattle business will make over $100,000 in the next 3 months. And guess what? My income is going upwards. I would be willing to bet that my income ends the year closer to $1 million than it does $500,000. I would be willing to bet. And another very realistic way to take a look at this is that, and here's the thing, I'm not lying about it. All right, I am legitimately telling the truth. If you don't believe me, then have fun dying poor by yourself. All right, legitimately, I don't know how else to, it just is what it is. I'm not lying about it. I am telling you the truth. All right, the whole thing about my perspective on this is that, me, I don't save people. I've come to this conclusion that, I don't save people. There's nothing that I can really even do about it at the end of the day. All right, if you're not going to put in the effort to save yourself, I talk about this, getting to the 10% mark, and from what I have seen, how ridiculous it is to see all of this worthless nonsense. It's almost it's almost kind of incredible. The idiocy is almost incredible. And it's like, there are people everywhere. Legitimately people everywhere that have found islands of gold, right? Legitimately have found islands of gold, and they are saying the island of gold is right here, the island of gold is right here, the island of gold is right here, and still nobody makes it. Legitimately, there are people everywhere that, that are like, I found an island of gold over here, commercial real estate. I found an island of gold over here, stocks. I found an island of gold over here, a cattle farm. Right, I found an island of gold over here, right? Whatever, a mutual fund, whatever it may be, right? There are legitimately people that have found islands of gold all over the place. And they are sitting there going, I have found an island of gold right here. It is right here. I'm showing you how to do it. And still nobody makes it. And a very realistic way to take a look at this is that legitimately, when you take a look at what I'm doing, it's effectively a 0.00000001%. I legitimately make enough money farming cattle. Okay, here's another way to look at this. Over the next 3 months, I will make about $100,000. Maybe a little bit more. Over the next 3 months. And guess what? When I make that money, I will reinvest that money and I will make more money with it. I will probably end the year closer to $1 million than $500,000. All right, I will legitimately end up making about $100,000 in the next 3 months. All right, and at the end of the day, I've spoken about this all the time. My thing is that I'm not a malicious person. All right, I do this with the idea that somebody must want to learn how to farm. I legitimately farm so well that I actually out-earn the entire economy just about, and it's by a massive margin. Legitimately, I make massively more money than the entire planet farming cattle in my backyard. Effectively everybody on the planet. I make more money than everybody, just about, and it's by a lot. All right, and I talked about this. I legitimately didn't have anybody that did this for me, and I still made it. I taught myself how to run cattle. I taught myself how to grow a crop. I taught myself how to run a business. All right, and I still made it. All right, making things easy, it's not possible. Farming is going to be hard practically no matter what. And you won't understand that unless you actually go out and put in some effort. All right, if you don't put in some effort, you're never going to make it. Nobody cares about your worthless opinion. You're going to die poor. Effectively, okay, and when I say you're going to die poor, I'm effectively talking about the entire planet, the entire country, right? And I talk about this, take my situation, for example. I didn't do anything malicious. I legitimately feed people. I look to do better with myself. Right, I actually look to improve the situation. Maybe I can give my cattle a better life than the commercial standard. Maybe I can give my animals a better life than the commercial standard. I actually do better than the commercial standard in the backyard by myself. These living conditions that my animals have are drastically higher than a commercial feed yard. Legitimately, I actually do better than the commercial average. My farm, the living quality for the animals on my farm is drastically higher than what you would see at a commercial feed yard on a majority of them, and I make more money. All right, I legitimately work on this thing 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. I live where I work. I didn't even get paid until my 12th year. All right, and I encourage people to make it, and I give very practical information, right? Like when you take a look at what I'm doing, I legitimately give very practical information, right? I give very practical information. If you legitimately managed to do 10%, you could farm for free. Legitimately, if you could just do 10%, right? If you go in the right direction and you practice over a long period of time, you could probably even get to the 10% mark in 3 years. And in all honesty, those 3 years that you practice, you probably won't even put much money into it. If you legitimately want to learn how to grow grass, and you're sitting there and you're taking a look at your grass, chances are you are going to mess it up the first couple of times, maybe even the first 10 times. But even if you mess it up, you'll lose like $250. A tonnage of fertilizer costs like $500. All right, granted that, to me, because to me, it's borderline ridiculous, right? Because it's like, I'm in the situation where I legitimately work my entire life. If running cattle was easy, everybody would be doing it. Right? And I'm in a situation right now where it's like I may be one of like 3 people, maybe not even 3, it might just be me, legitimately on the entire planet that can do something like this. Legitimately on the entire planet. I actually made more money running commercial cattle in my backyard than anybody on the planet made doing just about anything, and it's by a lot. I would reasonably anticipate that I make over $100,000 in the next 3 months just on my cattle business. Right, and I sit here and I show exactly how to do it and everything, and it's at the end of the day, God knows, I did, I did what I could. All right, and I did what I could. I talk about this all the time. The average person, is not, if you don't learn how to make money, if you don't learn how to do something, like if you don't go and put in the effort, like, it's not going to mean anything to you. I think that the whole thing about, one of the big things about this is that I legitimately had to teach myself how to run cattle and how to grow grass and run a business. Legitimately by myself. I work over 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. Legitimately, and I did not even get paid until my 12th year. All right, it is what it is. I mean, I worked for it. It's mine. You don't like it, you can sue me. All right, I legitimately worked for it. I had to work my entire life just about to get this. And I understand that I make a ballistic amount of money. I understand that I do, all right? And it's, but at the end of the day, I earned it. I can do whatever I want with it. If I want to put $2 million in a hole right now and light that money on fire, I'll do it. It won't even matter. All right, I earned it. It's mine. All right, you don't like it? I mean, throw your pissy fit somewhere else. Die poor by yourself. I legitimately had to do this by myself. I legitimately, I live where I work. I work 7 days a week. I work just about 15 hours every single day. And at the end of the day, if it comes down to it, I'm not going to go down poor. Why would I do that? I'll be rich by myself. Am I maliciously looking to be rich by myself? No, I'm not. I am legitimately giving all of my information away for free. And I tell you the truth. I'm legitimately telling the truth. I am not lying about it. You could legitimately, if you got to the 10% mark, you could practice for free. What does getting to the 10% mark look like? Growing some grass, getting some reasonable biomass accumulation, and somewhat developing an idea of what you are doing. If you understand that you need to utilize a certain type of fertilizer and certain type of weather conditions and certain types of cultivars of grass, when you put these things together, you can effectively grow some grass. And when you observe your grass, you can visibly, detail whether your grass has entered a vegetative or an early flowering stage, right? You can develop an idea of what does a flag leaf look like, right? If you understand some very basic things, then you have gotten to the 10% mark. And if you get to the 10% mark, you can practice for free. You can practice for free. Right? You don't have to worry about the money anymore. I talk about this all the time. You should not be worried about money. My business costs about $1,000, maybe $1,500. Let's just say $2,000 a month. And for that $2,000 a month, I make like $35,000, $40,000 back. I just take the $2,000 out of my 40 grand. Right? You have to start developing an idea for, how these things work. That's the most important part, because chances are, if you are legitimately, if you have nothing to show for yourself, if you're legitimately practically a bum, right, then guess what? You're probably going to die like that. You're probably not going to get anywhere your entire life. Legitimately, and I'm not making this up. I legitimately, honest to God, I do not know anybody that has even gotten to the 10% mark. Most people cannot even make $35,000 a year on a 10.5 acre field with commercial cattle. And I do 10 times that amount. All right, there is a very realistic chance that you're not going to figure it out and then you're just going to die poor. All right, and I give you the best information that I can to try and break you out of that. Dying a bum, legitimately living your life practically as a bum, right? I give you my information, and I legitimately tell you these things, and I show you these things to try and break you out of that. But legitimately breaking somebody out of being poor is almost impossible. Once you've become poor, you are probably going to die poor. Nobody cares about your opinion. Legitimately, I'm not joking about it. I'm not being malicious about it. If you have become poor, you are going to die poor. If you legitimately believe nonsensical things like you cannot do something because you don't have the money, you're going to die poor. My business costs me $2,000 and I make like $35,000 to $40,000 back. This is why I put such an emphasis on actually learning how to farm. Right? If you learn how to farm, right, that's one of the big things about me, is that my technical skill level at farming is borderline one of the best in the world. I may potentially be the best in the world at it. I could legitimately, if I had nothing, I could go onto a piece of land. I could just, get on Facebook Marketplace, find me a lease property, and start myself another farm immediately. I legitimately do all of this stuff by myself. I find the cattle by myself. I buy the cattle by myself. I raise the cattle by myself. I grow the grass by myself. I run the business by myself. I legitimately do all of this by myself. Even if I lost my farm today, I could just start myself another one tomorrow. It doesn't matter. And to put things in perspective, and I talk about this all the time, it costs me about $2,000 to make about $35,000. For about $2,000, I make about $35,000, $40,000. Well, but then it's, and then it's like, well, if you include, okay, let's just say $20,000. Because maybe I need to put, right, buy the cattle and, hold the equity in the animal and et cetera. Let's just say 20,000. All right, because, but but in all honesty, it's about 35,000. I will honestly make almost 100, maybe even a little bit more than $100,000 in the next 3 months, maybe even 2.5 months. I will make $100,000, and along the way, maybe I use $5,000. Maybe I use $5,000. Maybe. I legitimately will use let's just say $7,000 in the next 3 months, which I won't. Well, let's just say $7,000. I will make about $100,000, and it will cost me about $7,000, $5,000 to $7,000. All of the money that I need for my business comes from my business. Right? This is very important to understand. It's the whole idea of developing a wealth mindset. Your assets pay for themselves. When you buy an asset, you are looking for an equitable asset. What you're honestly looking for is a good asset that you understand, that has a large market evaluation. There is a very large market for it. What's a good example of this? Real estate. What's another good example of this? The S&P 500. What's another good example of this? A business that is producing a profit. All of these things are equitable on a very large scale. People, find these assets equitable. People find these assets valuable. When you are looking for the evaluation, when you are looking for the monetary evaluation of these various assets, how do you do it? For real estate, you just go and you ask a banker. All right, for stocks, you just look at the price of the stock, and then you take the P&E ratio. Go on the internet and look up the P&E ratio, PE ratio, and then type in your stock. All right, and if you want to figure out the price of a business, how do you do that? You multiply the amount of money that the business makes. If the business is projected to grow in the future, and the person who's running it is clearly indicating that the business is growing, and you take a look at the previous history of the business, and the business has grown substantially in the past, then the multiple of that business will be higher. If you have a business that has been going sideways, and the owner of the business does not really have any intentions of taking the business up, they're just going to run the business sideways and scrape money off that business, the multiple for that business will be lower. When you have a business that is failing, Don't touch it with a 50-foot pole. I wouldn't touch 99.999% of any deal on the planet with a 50-foot pole. Legitimately, I have plenty of money already. I make plenty of money by myself. I legitimately make more money by myself running cattle than anybody on the planet makes doing anything. And it's by a massive margin. I would bet that I make just about over $100,000 in the next 2.5 to 3 months with my cattle. I would be willing to bet. And at the end of the day, it is what it is. I earned it. You don't like it, you can sue me. I earned it. If running cattle was easy, everybody would do it. And I talk about this, the whole thing is, one of the big benefits of just learning how to make a massive sum of money. Like me, realistically, even if I had nothing, I could just redo everything, right? It wouldn't matter, right? Legitimately, I could just redo it all. It doesn't matter. And within a reasonable margin, after a certain point, the money doesn't even do anything. And so, one of the big benefits of legitimately learning how to make a large amount of money is that in terms of, from what I have seen, is that I legitimately do not worry about money at all. I do not worry about money at all. Legitimately, I don't worry about money. I have zero concerns about money. My money is so far in the positive that it does not matter. That's one of the big benefits. All right, and a lot of people, you probably don't understand what that feels like to legitimately just not be worried about money. I legitimately do not worry about money at all. I already make about $1,500 a day in my cattle business, and my income is actually going upwards. My income is actually going upwards. I already make about $1,500 a day, and I will probably double that before the end of the year. More than double it, maybe. I legitimately do not worry about money at all. Legitimately zero. And I've spoken about this. The whole thing about my situation is that, if I sat on this 10.5 acre field and I ran my lease property, and let's say I picked up another lease property or two and I doubled the size of my herd and I just sat here and I ran these cattle on 10.5 acres for the rest of my life, I would not worry about money. So I might as well go for it, right? That's the whole thing about my situation, is that I might as well go for it, and I might as well look to do better for myself. Because even, if I legitimately felt like coming back and farming 10.5 acres for the rest of my life and making $350,000 a year, I could always come back and do it. Right? That's how I have logically, come about this idea of doing better for myself, right? And I talk about this idea of normalized insanity. But this idea of normalized insanity, think of, and I always talk about the, when I say things that poor people say, it gives you a very realistic way to take a look at, how it's being perceived. All right. Because, imagine, okay, this is what I call normal, another example of normalized insanity. Imagine that you have, what if I started believing that, just making, and what if I started saying that, right? Oh, I just make enough to get by. What if I started saying that? All right, what if I started saying, oh, I use more money than I make? I just throw myself into the wind. What if I started saying stuff like that? Do you think that I would get anywhere with my life? What are the things that I say? I spend about 5% of the money that I make. I invest the rest of it. My income, I am looking to do better for myself. I'm not a malicious person, right? I don't do some horrible malicious thing. I legitimately run beef cattle, and I'm looking to do better for myself. That's the kind of stuff that I believe and that I say, right? It's very important. I mean, I think a lot of poor people don't understand, what they are. I don't think that poor people truly understand, the direction that they are putting themselves, and the overall idea of how they I guess go about their life, right? I mean, it's borderline, like, to me, in terms of my reality, like from what I have seen, it's borderline insanity. It's like we normalized insanity, right? You have people that legitimately spend more than they make, right? spend every dollar that they have. Not, and all sorts of just crazy things. It's borderline, insanity. It's borderline like a legitimized, because it's borderline like a normalized insanity, because the population at large is what's doing it, and it borderline. It's almost like, what in the world? Because when you take a look at my situation, I spend about 5 to 10% of the money that I make. I spend about 5 or 10% of it, and then I invest the rest of it. All of it. I legitimately invest over 100% of my income every year. I don't go, oh my God, now that I'm making this money, let me go and buy myself a Lamborghini. I don't do that. Oh my God, let me go and get myself a small apartment in Dubai. I don't do that. All right, it's borderline. It's borderline, because, and I always say, don't group hug people. Do not group hug people. This whole idea that everything is just, everything is just a Disneyland adventure, and that everyone should just group hug each other is complete. That's almost borderline insanity as well. If something is going wrong, then you should speak up. You should speak up and address it. All right, we should not live in a world where people are, doing things like spending more money than they make. All right, legitimately spending every dollar that they have. We should not be living in that's not like sane. I don't know how else to put it. It's borderline like, what in the world? Because what if I started doing that? Imagine what if I started doing that. Right? I mean, that would not be good, right? And that's what I'm saying. But when I see other people do that, it's not good. I legitimately invest over 100% of my income every year. And in terms of my income, what do I mean by I spend about 10% of the money that I make? Over the next 3 months, over the next 2.5 months, my cattle business will make me about $100,000. As of today, I make about $500,000 a year, and my income is going higher. I am looking to do better for myself. I would bet that my income goes over $1 million a year just from my cattle business by the end of this year. Legitimately. All right, that's how, and in terms of a realistic sense, I would, it doesn't matter if you put 10,000 bums together, it doesn't matter. I would bet that I have a more sane idea about whatever. I'm more sane than anybody. I would be willing to bet. I am more sane than anybody. Legitimately. I invest over 100% of my income. I would be willing to bet that I am more sane than anybody. Just about. I legitimately even sit here and show people exactly how I do it. I legitimately do better than effectively everybody on the entire planet in terms of a financial sense. Legitimately multiple hundreds of times better than the average person. And I sat here and I showed people how to do it. I am more sane than anybody. I would be willing to bet. I invest more than 100% of my income every year. I only spend about 10% of what I make. Maybe not even 10%. All right, I don't know how, what I call a normalized insanity. We normalize, there is a lot of normalized insanity. The group hug and, and all sorts of just, people just going on these, just also, just legitimately going on a downward spiral for infinity. Right? And, it just is what it is. I mean, at the end of the day, I actually did the work and I actually do this stuff in real life. I legitimately farm so well that I effectively take a dump on the entire planet. Financially. When you take a look at just the amount of money that I make, running my cattle business, it puts me in the top 0.000001%. All right, and when you put it all together, like when you legitimately consider the fact that I run the cattle by myself, I run the business by myself, and I grow the grass by myself, and I do all of these things to a world-class level. I mean, we're talking about like I may legitimately be one of the only people on the entire planet that can do this. If you put me on a field by myself, I could start myself a cattle business whenever. I legitimately farm so well that I make more money than everybody on the entire planet. Just about. It just is, I'm not lying about it. I am legitimately not lying about it. I grew my business by over 1,000% in the last 2.5 years. Over the next 3 months, I will grow my business probably by 250%. My income is going upwards, skyrocketing. I understand what is happening. I've taken a look at it. I understand what is happening. I am making a ballistic amount of money. I effectively make enough money to do anything on the entire planet. I actually make enough money in my sleep to spend money for the rest of the entire day. Legitimately. I make about $1,500 a day right now, and over the next 3 months, I make more than double that. If running cattle was easy, more people would be doing it. And I put in the emphasis on this idea all the time. You have to go out and you have to start putting in some effort, and it doesn't have to be cattle, okay? I talk about this, you don't have to become a cattleman to become rich. You can do it doing anything, but if you don't put in some effort, you're not going to make it. If you don't put in a lot of effort, you're not going to make it. It doesn't matter what you do. All right, if you decide that the stock market makes sense to you, then go and be in the stock market. If you say that real estate makes sense to you, then go and be a part of, go and be in real estate. But you're going to have to put in a lot more effort, almost everybody. And just to put things in perspective, I work 7 days a week and I work 15 hours a day. 7 days a week. I didn't even get paid for the first 12 years. There were times when I worked more than 15 hours a day for weeks on end. I legitimately live where I work. I work on this thing every day. When I wake up, I take a look at my balance sheet. I take a look at my financials. I think about where should my business get headed. I take care of the animals. If I have any sick animals, I take care of the animals. I grow the grass by myself. I look for real estate deals. I run the business. I legitimately do all of this by myself. And I make a ballistic amount of money. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter to me. You want to die poor, have fun, die poor, nobody cares. You don't want to put in any effort, then you're going to die poor. I fell out of heaven a 7 in my life's a magical journey. You're going to die poor. Nobody cares, legitimately. All right, at the end of the day, I actually do this stuff in real life. And I would be willing to bet that I will end up making just about $100,000 in my cattle business over the next 3 months. And my income will go up. I will just about double that over the next 5 months. I have already decided to do better for myself. I'm not a malicious person. I don't sell my soul to the devil. If running cattle was easy, more people would be doing it. All right. I've decided that is what I will do. I will do better for myself. I will run more cattle. I already make enough money to effectively do anything on the entire planet. And that's it for me today, YouTube. You have a good one.